Ever feel like the days are just repeating, like you're running as fast as you can, but the scenery never changes? You're not alone. Meet Vince, 35, a union electrician with 15 years under his belt. From the outside, his life looks solid. A house in a quiet neighborhood, a wife, 2 kids, steady work. The kind of life many men build brick by brick. But inside, something was shifting. The pride in being a provider was starting to feel like a prison. The weight of responsibility, the debt from his father's medical bills, the endless overtime, it was crushing him. He was exhausted, not just physically, but something deeper. He was going through the motions, a ghost in his own home, barely present with his wife, Sarah, and his kids, Leo and Maya. Vince's days were a blur of pre-dawn alarms, harsh fluorescent lights on the job site, and the numbing glow of the TV at night. His hands, calloused and scarred from years of pulling wire, felt heavier than ever. Even the simple joy of coaching Leo's little league team had become another task on the endless to-do list. He remembered a time when those hands could coax music from a guitar, when he had dreams bigger than the next paycheck. Now, just survival. The breaking point came unexpectedly. Late one night, Leo found Vince in the garage, staring at a dusty guitar case. "Dad, why don't you ever play that anymore?" the boy asked, his innocent question cutting through Vince's weary resignation. Vince mumbled something about being busy, but Leo replied, "Mom said you used to love it." That's when it hit him. He wasn't just sacrificing his own passions, he was teaching his son to do the same. He saw his own weary stoicism reflected in Leo's eyes, and it broke him. Vince realized he couldn't keep living like this. His potential wasn't about becoming someone different, but about reclaiming the parts of himself he'd let die. The failure wasn't his job. The failure was letting his job be his only definition and excuse for not living a more intentional life. A shift began, a quiet rebellion against the autopilot life he had been living. It started with a simple ritual, one small act of reclaiming his presence, right there at the dinner table. Vince's days were a blur of pre-dawn alarms, harsh fluorescent lights on the job site, and the numbing glow of the TV at night. His hands, calloused and scarred from years of pulling wire, felt heavier than ever. Even the simple joy of coaching Leo's little league team had become another task on the endless to-do list. He remembered a time when those hands could coax music from a guitar, when he had dreams bigger than the next paycheck. Now, just survival. The breaking point came unexpectedly. Late one night, Leo found Vince in the garage, staring at a dusty guitar case. "Dad, why don't you ever play that anymore?" the boy asked, his innocent question cutting through Vince's weary resignation. Vince mumbled something about being busy, but Leo replied, "Mom said you used to love it." That's when it hit him. He wasn't just sacrificing his own passions, he was teaching his son to do the same. He saw his own weary stoicism reflected in Leo's eyes, and it broke him. Vince realized he couldn't keep living like this. His potential wasn't about becoming someone different, but about reclaiming the parts of himself he'd let die. The failure wasn't his job. The failure was letting his job be his only definition and excuse for not living a more intentional life. A shift began, a quiet rebellion against the autopilot life he had been living. It started with a simple ritual, one small act of reclaiming his presence, right there at the dinner table. For years, dinner at the small house in the quiet, working-class suburban neighborhood had been a chaotic affair. Vince would arrive home, exhausted from his shift as a union electrician, shower quickly, and slump into his chair at the head of the table. Sarah, juggling her own work and the kids, would serve up a meal, often something quick and easy, like frozen pizza or microwave dinners. The conversation was minimal, usually centered around logistics. Who needed to be where, what bills needed to be paid. Harold, Vince's father, would often sit in silence, lost in his own thoughts, adding another layer of unspoken tension to the room. The first night Vince tried something different, he felt awkward. He walked in, left his phone in the truck, a small act of defiance against the constant demands of work, and actually looked at his family. Maya, his 7-year-old daughter, was drawing on her placemat with a crayon. Leo, 10, was fidgeting with his fork, staring at the TV in the corner. Sarah looked tired, her shoulders slumped. He sat down, and before anyone could start eating, he said, "Hold on a sec, everyone." He cleared his throat, feeling the weight of their stares. I want to try something different tonight. Let's all put our phones away, turn off the TV, and just talk about our day." "About anything." Sarah raised an eyebrow, surprised. Leo groaned, but Maya seemed intrigued. Harold simply nodded, his expression unreadable. "Come on, guys," Vince said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Just for tonight, let's see what happens." The first few minutes were excruciating. Silence hung heavy in the air, punctuated only by the clinking of silverware. Vince struggled to find something to say. He could feel the familiar urge to retreat, to just eat his food and disappear back into the comforting numbness of routine. But then Maya spoke up. "I drew a picture of my teacher," she said, holding up her placemat. "She has really funny hair." That simple statement broke the ice. Leo started talking about his baseball practice. Sarah mentioned a frustrating meeting at work. Even Harold chimed in with a story about something he'd read in the newspaper. Vince listened, really listened, for the first time in what felt like years. He heard the nuances in their voices, the subtle emotions behind their words. He saw the way Maya's eyes lit up when she talked about art, the way Leo's shoulders straightened when he described hitting a double. He felt a flicker of connection, a spark of warmth that had been missing from his life for too long. As the days turned into weeks, the dinner table ritual became a sacred space, a haven from the chaos of their lives. Vince started looking forward to it. He found himself thinking about things he wanted to share, things he wanted to ask. He learned about Maya's secret love for dinosaurs, about Leo's struggles with a bully at school, about Sarah's dreams of going back to school. He even started opening up about his own frustrations at work, his own forgotten passions. One evening, Sarah asked him, "Vince, you seem different. What's going on?" He hesitated, unsure how to explain. "I don't know," he said finally. I realized I was missing out on everything. On you, on the kids, on my own life. I just wanted to be more present." Sarah smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that he hadn't seen in a long time. "I've missed you," she said softly. The road ahead was still long and difficult. The debt remained, the house still needed repairs, and the pressures of work hadn't disappeared. But something had shifted within Vince. He had rediscovered a sense of purpose, a connection to his family, a flicker of hope for the future. The simple ritual at the dinner table had become a catalyst, a reminder that even the smallest act of intention can have a profound impact. He was still an electrician, still a husband, still a father, but he was also something more, a man who was finally awake. The alarm screams at 4:30 a.m. Vince, 35, groans, slapping it silent. Another day. He hauls himself out of bed, the mattress groaning in protest. Coffee, black and strong, is the first order of business. He pulls on his work boots, worn and stained with years of grime. Out the door by 5:15, a thermos of coffee and a stale donut his only companions. The drive to the job site is a blur of headlights and the drone of the engine. He's a union electrician, 15 years in the trade. $32 an hour. Good money, but never enough. $65,000 in debt hangs over him like a storm cloud. The radio blares classic rock, a soundtrack to a life he barely recognizes anymore. 6 a.m. The job site is a hive of activity, a cacophony of drills, saws, and shouting. Vince gets to work, pulling wire, bending conduit, lost in the rhythm of the job. His hands, calloused and scarred, move with practiced ease. He's good at what he does, a problem solver. He can see the whole system in his head, the flow of electricity, the connections, the solutions. Lunch is a burger from a food truck eaten standing up. Back to work. 4 p.m. The day is finally done. Exhaustion pulls at him, a heavy weight on his shoulders. The drive home is just as monotonous as the drive-in. He pictures his house, the peeling paint on the porch, the dripping faucet. More things to fix, more bills to pay. He walks in the door at 5. Sarah, 34, is already at the stove. The kids, Leo, 10, and Maya, 7, are squabbling over a video game. "Hey," he says, his voice rough. No one really hears him. He showers, trying to wash off the grime and the fatigue. Dinner is a hurried affair, everyone focused on their own plates. 6 p.m., he collapses on the couch, the TV flickering. He's asleep before he knows it. 9 p.m., Sarah nudges him awake. The kids need help with their homework. He groans, pushing himself up. More arguments about the bills, about his father, Harold, who lives with them now. "We need to figure something out, Vince," Sarah says, her voice tight. He just nods, too tired to argue. 10 p.m., bed, repeat. The weight of it all presses down on him, the debt, the responsibility, the feeling of being trapped. He remembers Leo finding him staring at his old guitar. "Dad, why don't you ever play that anymore?" A simple question that cut him to the core. His son doesn't even know that his dad loved music. He closes his eyes, the exhaustion pulling him under. He's a ghost in his own life. Late that night, Vince couldn't sleep. He slipped out to the garage, the cool air a welcome change from the stuffy house. He stared at the dark shape under the old canvas tarp, the guitar case. A wave of regret washed over him. He remembered the dreams he had, the music he wanted to make. Now it was just another thing covered in dust. He lifted the tarp, the musty smell of disuse filling his nostrils. He unlatched the case, revealing the worn acoustic guitar. He hadn't touched it in years. His fingers, calloused from pulling wire, felt clumsy on the strings. He strummed a chord, the sound flat and lifeless. His son's words echoed in his head. "Mom said you used to love it." It wasn't an accusation, just a simple observation, but it hit him harder than any reprimand. He looked at his hands. These were the hands that provided, that fixed things, that built things. But they were also the hands that used to create music, that used to express something more than just getting the job done. He remembered the day he became a journeyman, the pride that swelled in his chest. He was going to make something of himself. Thought back to high school, his band, the local gigs. They weren't great, but they were his. He closed his eyes, picturing the crowd, the lights, the energy. He hadn't felt that alive in years. Vince ran a hand over the guitar's neck, the wood smooth beneath his fingers. He could almost feel the vibrations of the music he used to play. It wasn't just about the music, he realized. It was about the passion, the creativity, the sense of self he had lost somewhere along the way. He looked at the guitar, then at his workbench, cluttered with tools, a jumble of wires, nuts, and bolts. He pictured Leo, watching him, learning from him. What was he teaching his son? That life was just about work, about paying bills, about being tired. He knew he didn't want that to be his legacy. "Dad!" Vince jumped, startled. Leo stood in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. "What are you doing?" He hesitated, unsure how to explain. "Just remembering," he said, his voice hoarse. Leo stepped into the garage, his bare feet padding softly on the concrete floor. He looked at the guitar, then at his father. "Can you play something?" Vince swallowed hard. "I don't know, Leo. It's been a long time. Please." He looked at his son's earnest face, the hope in his eyes. He couldn't say no. He took a deep breath and strummed a chord, this time with a little more conviction. It was still rough, still rusty, but it was a start. He closed his eyes and began to play. A simple melody, a song he hadn't played in years. As he played, he saw Leo smile slightly. It was a small, almost imperceptible change, but it was enough. He stopped playing. "There you go, son," he said quietly. Leo looked at his dad, his expression suddenly serious. "Mom said you used to love it. Why did you stop?" Vince looked at his son. His son was right. He used to love it. And what else did he used to love? Who was he? He was an electrician, yes. A father, yes. A husband. But who was Vince? And where did he go? Vince replied, "I got busy, son. I got a lot of things to do." Leo looked at him and said with a maturity far beyond his young years, "But what do you want to do, Dad?" The simple question hit Vince like a physical blow. What did he want to do? He didn't have an answer. And in that moment, staring at his son in the dim light of the garage, he realized that he had to find one. If not for himself, then for Leo. He couldn't let his son grow up believing that life was just about giving up on your dreams. He had to show him that it was possible to be both responsible and passionate, to be a provider and a person. He had to start living again. Vince stood there, the dusty guitar case suddenly heavy in his hands. Leo's question hung in the air, a simple truth exposed under the single garage light bulb. He looked at his son, then back at the guitar. He felt a cold dread creeping into his heart. He was teaching his son to give up. All this time, grinding at the job, worrying about debt, he'd been modeling a life of quiet desperation. A slow death of the spirit. He thought of his dad, Harold, now living with them. A good man, worked hard his whole life. But life had worn him down, bitterness had taken root. Was that his future? He looked at his hands, calloused and strong, hands that could build anything but had mostly been used to just survive. He remembered the pride he felt becoming a journeyman electrician at 23, the first time he held his son Leo, the day he bought that used car. All of them felt so long ago. He thought of Sarah, his wife. The distance between them, the endless cycle of bills and arguments. Thought of Maya, his sweet little girl, and how little time he actually spent with her, really seeing her. All that lost time was suddenly so heavy on his heart. He glanced at his debt. $65,000 staring him down. He tried overtime that didn't fix it. Now he was tired and lost, farther than ever from what he loved. Vince walked to the workbench and set down the guitar. He turned and looked at Leo. "Go on inside, son. It's getting late." Leo hesitated, sensing something shift in his dad. "Just go on. I'll be in a bit." Leo nodded slowly and turned to leave. As he reached the doorway, he paused. "Good night, Dad." "Night, Leo." Vince waited until Leo was gone, then turned back to the workbench. He stared at his hands, flexing them, opening and closing them. He stared at the toolbox, a jumble of wrenches, screwdrivers, and wire strippers. Tools he knew intimately, that he'd used every day for 15 years. Tools that had built a life but also trapped him. He started pacing, feeling the familiar knot of anxiety tighten in his chest. Then he stopped right in the middle of the garage and looked up at the bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. He took a deep breath, held it for a moment, and let it out slowly. The air was thick with the smell of oil and sawdust, the ghosts of projects unfinished. He closed his eyes. The image of his father haunted him, Harold's face etched with disappointment. He remembered his own dreams of college, of engineering, of building things that mattered to him. He thought of the half-finished projects in the garage, the discarded sketches in his notebook, the guitar gathering dust. It all flooded back, a tidal wave of regret. And then something shifted, a flicker of anger, not at anyone else but at himself. "I am done living like this," he whispered. Words felt strange, foreign, but also true. They felt like a promise. He didn't know how he'd change things, but he knew he had to. Vince didn't have a grand plan. He just knew he couldn't keep going the way he was. He went inside. Sarah was at the kitchen table, paying bills. He knew that look. She was wrestling with the debt again. $65,000 hanging over them. $25,000 of that from his dad's health issues. He sat down heavily. "Long day?" Sarah asked, not looking up. "Yeah," Vince said, rubbing his tired eyes. He didn't want to argue. He didn't want to talk about money. He just wanted some peace, but he knew he couldn't keep avoiding the real conversations. "I need to talk to you about the credit card bills," Sarah said, her voice tight. "We're going to have to cut back somewhere, Vince. I don't know how much longer we can keep doing this." The words hit him hard. He thought about Leo, about Maya. About the sacrifices Sarah made, working part-time to be home with the kids while still managing the household. He'd been so focused on providing, he'd missed the toll it was taking on her. "I know," Vince said softly. "I know. Let me look at them." He reached for the stack of bills. He saw the numbers, the interest rates, the late fees. It was a suffocating weight. The union electrician with 15 years' experience felt helpless, useless in this moment. But then an idea sparked, a small light in the darkness. It was a thought he'd been pushing away for years. Maybe I can pick up some side work," Vince said, his voice hesitant. "Electrical jobs, small stuff. There's a lot of older folks in the neighborhood that could use some help. I could do it after work, weekends." Sarah looked up, surprised. "You do that? You're already working so hard." "I know," Vince said. "But I can't keep waking up every day just to work. I'm tired of that. I'm tired of seeing it all fall apart." He did more than just side jobs to climb out of the hole. He started with small changes. No more fast food lunches on the job. He started packing a sandwich and an apple every morning. 30 minutes of walking, nothing crazy. He even dug out his old guitar. It was out of tune, and his fingers were clumsy, but the chords still felt familiar. The hardest part was the dinner table. Dinner had become a battleground of rushed meals and silent resentment. He was always too tired to talk, too busy thinking about the next job, the next bill. He knew he had to change that. One evening, he made a conscious effort. He left his phone in the truck and walked in the house. "Hey, guys," he said, trying to sound cheerful. "Hi, Dad," Leo and Maya mumbled, glued to their tablets. Harold was already at the table, staring blankly ahead. Sarah was stirring something on the stove, her face etched with exhaustion. "All right, no phones at the table," Vince announced, his voice firm but gentle. Leo protested. "But Dad." "No buts," Vince said. "Tonight we talk, we share, we eat together." It was awkward at first. Harold was silent, Leo and Maya fidgeted, but slowly, gradually, a conversation started. Maya told him about a drawing she'd made in school. Leo talked about his baseball game. He asked Sarah about her day, really listened. Then he did something unexpected. "Hey," he said, looking around the table, "let's try something new. Every night we each say one good thing that happened to us today, one thing we're grateful for." Leo shrugged. "Okay, I got a good grade on my math test." Maya smiled. "I made a new friend." Sarah looked at him, her eyes softening. "I got a compliment at work." Harold, after a long pause, said quietly, "The sun was shining." Vince smiled. "Mine is. I'm grateful for all of you. Even when it's crazy, I'm grateful." That simple ritual, that one small act of intentional connection, began to change everything. It wasn't a magic bullet. The debt was still there. The work was still hard. But slowly, surely, the darkness began to lift. He started finding joy in the small things again. A good song on the radio, a helping hand from a coworker, the sound of his kids laughing. He wasn't just an electrician anymore. He was a husband, a father, a man with dreams. And he was finally ready to start living again. Vince sat at the table, the weight of his $65,000 debt still pressing down on him, but tonight something felt different. The fluorescent kitchen light seemed a little less harsh, the peeling wallpaper a little less depressing. He glanced at Sarah, noticing the faint smile playing on her lips. He saw a flicker of hope in her eyes, a hope mirrored in his own heart. He was 35 years old, a union electrician with 15 years under his belt, and he felt like he was finally waking up. Later that night, after the kids were asleep and Harold was settled in, Sarah lingered in the kitchen. "That was nice, Vince." She rarely initiated conversation like this. "Really nice." He nodded, running a hand through his short, dark hair, flecks of gray catching the light. "Needed to happen," he mumbled. He wanted to tell her about the guitar, about Leo's words that had pierced his soul, but the words caught in his throat. He pictured his secret dream of opening a small fabrication shop, a place where he could design and build things with his hands, not just fix wires. Fear gnawed at him. He was a provider, not a dreamer. What if he failed? What if he dragged his family down with him? But the image of his dad's layoff, the one that had made him give up his own dreams, the one that had sent him straight from high school into the apprenticeship, flashed in his mind. He couldn't let that happen to his kids. He had to show them that life was more than just survival. He looked at Sarah, her face tired but open. He made a promise, not out loud, but deep in his soul. He was going to change, not into some different person, but back into the man he used to be, the man he knew was still inside. He would find a way to honor his responsibilities and pursue his passions. He would reclaim his life one small step at a time. "I'm going to start waking up earlier," he finally said, his voice raspy. "Before work, need some time to myself." Sarah nodded slowly. "Okay," she said simply. "That sounds good." Vince walked out to the garage, the cool night air a welcome change from the stuffy house. He stared at his old guitar case, the dust of forgotten dreams clinging to its surface. He reached out, hesitated, then picked it up. He unlatched the clasps, a faint click echoing in the silence. He didn't play it, not yet, but he held it close, a symbol of the promise he had made. A promise to his son, to his wife, to his father, and most importantly, to himself. The first morning was brutal. 4:00 a.m. The alarm blared, a rude awakening after a fitful night. Vince, 35, a union electrician with 15 years' experience, fumbled for the snooze button, every muscle screaming in protest. He thought about Sarah, sleeping soundly in the next room, Leo and Maya, oblivious to his internal battle. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, the cold floor jolting him awake. He remembered the look on Leo's face, the question in his eyes. He pushed himself up, the weight of his 255 pounds a heavy burden. He shuffled into the kitchen, the familiar creaks of the old house a soundtrack to his misery. Black coffee, strong and bitter, was the only thing that seemed to cut through the fog. He stared out the window, the sky still a deep, impenetrable black. The silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. He thought about his dad, Harold, 72, asleep in the back bedroom. The mounting medical bills and added stress of his dad living with them seemed to weigh him down more than usual. He thought about his $65,000 in debt. He knew this had to change. He forced himself to go to the garage. It was cold and damp, the air thick with the smell of oil and sawdust. He flipped on the bare bulb overhead, the harsh light revealing the cluttered space. Tools hung haphazardly on the wall, a testament to unfinished projects. He saw the guitar case still leaning against the workbench where he had left it the night before. He walked over to it, his hand trembling slightly. It was time. He opened the case. The old acoustic guitar felt foreign in his hands. He hadn't played it in years, not since the demands of work and family had choked out his passions. His fingers felt clumsy as he strummed a chord, the sound thin and out of tune. He grimaced. "Rough," he muttered to himself, his voice raspy. He remembered his garage band days, the raw energy, the feeling of creating something with his friends. Now he just felt tired, defeated. He sat down on an old stool and began to tune the guitar, each small adjustment bringing it closer to the sound it once was. The next few days followed a similar pattern. 4:00 a.m., coffee, garage, guitar. Each morning was a battle against his own exhaustion and self-doubt. His fingers ached. His back protested. There were days when he wanted to give up, to crawl back into bed and forget the promise he had made. But he kept at it, driven by the memory of Leo's question and the gnawing feeling that he was wasting his life. He remembered his turning point when he abandoned his college dreams to provide for his family. Was this worth it? It felt like he was teaching his son to give up on his dreams. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, Sarah found him in the garage, hunched over the guitar. He looked up, startled. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft. He shrugged. "Just trying to remember how," he said, his voice barely a whisper. She didn't say anything, just watched him for a moment. "Leo told me you played in a band," she said finally. Vince nodded. He thought he heard a reminiscent sound of the music in Sarah's voice as well. Yeah, a long time ago. She smiled, a small, sad smile. He was impressed. He asked me if you could teach him. Vince's head snapped up. He did. A warmth spread through his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Yeah, Sarah said, her eyes sparkling for a moment. Maybe you should. He looked down at the guitar, his calloused fingers tracing the worn strings. He looked at Sarah, who smiled and nodded. The promise he made to himself was about to be a family promise. He was going to make it. The next morning, day 12 of his self-imposed challenge, Vince woke before the alarm, a nervous energy thrumming beneath his skin. 4:00 a.m. Coffee. Garage. But this time Leo was there, perched on an old stool, his eyes wide with anticipation. "Ready, Dad?" he asked, clutching a toy guitar almost as big as himself. Vince smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, chasing away some of the fatigue. "Let's do it, buddy." He started with the basics, showing Leo how to hold the guitar, how to strum a simple chord. Leo struggled at first, his small fingers clumsy and uncoordinated, but Vince patiently guided him, remembering his own frustration as a beginner. He thought about his father, Harold. Could he teach him too? He was old, but maybe teaching old dogs new tricks was exactly what Harold needed. As Leo's fingers found their place, a grin spread across his face. "I'm doing it, Dad!" he exclaimed. Vince ruffled his son's hair, a surge of pride washing over him. It had been so long since he had felt this way. He'd found a new proud moment to add to the list. Day 16 arrived with a different kind of weariness. A tough job wiring a new commercial building had left Vince drained, both physically and mentally. He could have easily skipped his morning ritual, succumbed to the allure of the couch and the numb embrace of the television. But he had made a promise, not just to himself, but to Leo. He pushed himself out of bed, the familiar ache in his back a constant reminder of the years of hard labor that had shaped his life. Maybe he needed a different job altogether, but his $65,000 debt loomed like a hungry beast. It was a thought he hated but kept creeping up on him. As he sat in the garage, tuning the guitar, Sarah walked in. "Harold asked if he could watch," she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. Vince looked up, surprised. His father had never shown any interest in his music before. Harold shuffled in, leaning heavily on his cane, and settled into a lawn chair. "Always liked that old Merle Haggard," he grumbled, his voice raspy. Vince chuckled. "All right, Dad, I'll see what I can do." He started playing a simple country tune, his voice rough but heartfelt. He glanced over at Leo, who was strumming along enthusiastically, and then at his father, whose eyes were closed, a faint smile on his face. Even his family was impressed, maybe more than he had realized. It seemed like he was starting something special. Day 21 marked 3 weeks since the conversation with his son in the garage, the breaking point that had forced him to confront the truth about his life. 3 weeks of early mornings, aching fingers, and the nagging voice of self-doubt. But it was also 3 weeks of connection, of shared laughter, and of rediscovering a part of himself he thought he had lost forever. After work, Vince told Sarah that he was going to the garage to play for a little while. "Want to join?" he asked casually. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise and something else, hope. Crossing her face, "Maybe later," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. As he walked to the garage, he realized something profound. He wasn't just teaching his son how to play guitar, he was teaching his family how to live again. He was teaching them to follow their dreams just like he was learning again. Day 30, a month. Vince stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. 30 days of waking before the world, 30 days of calloused fingers and rusty chords, 30 days of pushing back against the crushing weight of obligation. He could see it in his face. The perpetual slump in his shoulders seemed a little less pronounced. The bags under his eyes, though still present, weren't quite as heavy. He'd even lost a few pounds, maybe 5. Small victories. At work, even the guys were noticing. "You seem lighter, Vince," his foreman Hank had said during lunch, squinting at him like he was a faulty circuit. "Less like you're carrying the weight of the world on your back." Vince just shrugged, took a bite of his sandwich. "Just trying to keep up, Hank." But inside, a flicker of pride. They saw it. He felt asterisk it. That evening at dinner, Leo was animated, describing a play he'd made at baseball practice. Maya was drawing furiously, a picture of a rainbow with stick figures holding hands. Even Harold, usually silent, was muttering something about the sorry state of the evening news. Sarah watched it all, a soft smile gracing her lips. As Vince reached for his water glass, his daughter, Maya, looked up at him. "Daddy, you're smiling more." The simple statement hit him harder than any compliment. His little girl noticed. He glanced at Sarah, her eyes meeting his, a silent question passing between them. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the urge to disappear into the TV after dinner. Instead, he cleared his plate and asked Leo if he wanted to work on that guitar riff together. Later, after the kids were in bed, Sarah found him in the garage, hunched over his workbench, sanding a piece of wood for a small lamp he was building. "It's nice, Vince," she said quietly, running her hand over the smooth surface. "You always were good with your hands." Up, surprised by the softness in her voice. "Just needed something to do besides pull wire all day," he mumbled. "Something for me?" She hesitated, then stepped closer. "About the bills, I took a look at the budget. We can cut back some more. Maybe we can finally start making a dent in that credit card debt." A wave of relief washed over him. He hadn't even asked, hadn't even complained about the weight of the $65,000 looming over them. She was seeing him, really seeing him, and responding. "Thanks, Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. That means a lot." He picked up the lamp, turning it over in his hands. It wasn't much, just a simple piece of wood and some electrical components. But it was something he had created, something that was purely his. That night, as he lay in bed next to Sarah, he didn't reach for his phone. He didn't think about the looming debt or the endless grind of work. He thought about Maya's smile, about Leo's enthusiasm, about the quiet understanding in Sarah's eyes. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace. He still had a long way to go, but he was moving. He was getting back on his feet and getting back to life. The next morning, Vince woke up before his alarm, 4:00 a.m. He didn't reach for his phone. Instead, he slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Sarah. He went to the garage, flipped on the light, and stared at his workbench. The half-finished lamp sat there, a beacon in the cluttered space. He spent the next hour sanding, wiring, and assembling, his calloused hands moving with a newfound purpose. He thought back to his apprenticeship, the pride he felt the day he became a journeyman. He'd lost that feeling, buried it under years of obligation. But it was there, flickering back to life. Finished the lamp just as the first rays of dawn peeked through the garage window. He carried it inside, placed it on the kitchen counter, and went to wake Leo for school. "Dad, that's cool," Leo exclaimed, admiring the lamp. "Did you make that?" Vince nodded, a smile creeping across his face. "Yeah, I did. Thought it might look good in your room." Leo beamed. "Awesome." It wasn't much, but it was connection. Real connection, not just duty. Work that day felt different. The same endless pulling of wire, the same ache in his back, but something had shifted. He caught himself whistling a tune he hadn't thought of in years, a song his old garage band used to play. He even took his lunch break away from the usual fast food joint, opting for a quiet spot by the river. He remembered his secret interest in industrial design, the books he hid away because they felt impractical. Maybe they weren't so impractical after all. That evening after dinner, Vince asked Maya if she wanted to help him in the garage. "Can we build something?" she asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "Sure can," he replied, ruffling her hair. They spent the next hour building a birdhouse out of scrap wood. Maya hammered and painted, her small hands surprisingly adept. He thought of his own childhood, taking things apart and putting them back together. He'd always imagined building something bigger, a business, a life on his own terms. But the factory layoff had changed that trajectory. Today, looking at his daughter, he wondered if that dream was still in reach. Later, after the kids were in bed, Vince sat down at the kitchen table with Sarah. "I was thinking," he said, hesitant but determined, "about that fabrication shop. I know it sounds crazy with the debt and everything." Sarah looked at him, her expression unreadable. "But I've been doing some research," he continued. "There's a small business loan program specifically for tradesmen. It wouldn't be much, but it could be enough to get started." He paused, searching her eyes for any sign of encouragement. "Just a small space, maybe a few tools. I could still work my union job, just do this on the side." Sarah was silent for a moment, then she said, "Vince, that's amazing. I know you've always wanted to do something like that." A wave of hope surged through him. "But what about the debt?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "We can figure it out," he said, his voice firm. "We'll cut back even more. We'll get creative. We'll build a plan to get out of debt." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I promise, Sarah, this isn't just some pipe dream. I'm serious about this." He could feel his resolve growing. He was 35 years old, a union electrician with 15 years of experience. He was tired, overweight, and buried under debt. But he was also a father, a husband, and a man with a dream, and he wasn't going to let that dream die.